You're listening to A Slice of Therapy with me, Alun Parry. So in this episode, I want to look at the difference between reality that we experience kind of face to face and virtual reality. That kind of difference between, the question of how social is social media. A question that many people are asking these days, is social media actually anti-social media? And the reason why this question comes up for me in particular is that I noticed that in my life, the three people three friends that is, who I see most of are not actually on Facebook. And so it got me to wondering, is that actually a coincidence? Is the fact that the only way that we can interact is actually in person, or at least by a telephone connection, is their absence on Facebook the reason why we tend to see more of each other? Is the fact that we don't connect falsely, really, but we don't have that kind of false connection, that kind of ghost of a connection on Facebook that kind of deceives us into thinking that we're having connection? Is the absence of that the reason why we reach out to each other? Why they'll reach out to me and arrange to actually meet up, and I'll reach out to them? Because the only way that we can get each other is if we do it through actual life rather than virtual life, reality rather than virtual reality. And so it's led me to kind of make a decision around my own Facebook friends, because one of the things I notice is that I have Facebook friends who are from all over the place, and that's fine. Then it is very hard, isn't it, for us to make in-person connections. And yet many of the people that have gathered onto my Facebook over the years who live locally are people who I never ever see. People I could go back 18 months, 2 years, and I've never met up with in that time. And I don't have any plans to meet up with them over the next year. And so it gets us to kind of thinking of it in those terms. It gets us to do one of two things, I suppose. Of those people that we could actually see, why, when we take a 3-year period, are people that we never see, have no intention to see, on our group of Facebook friends? Is the fact that they're on our group of Facebook friends and we see their status updates a deceit, a thing that lies to us that we're having some sort of connection and contact with a person that actually in reality we never ever are? And the other thing that it made me think is that if these people are people who are never making contact with us and we're never meeting up with them, is that maybe due to the fact that because we're on this virtual network and we have these kind of ghostly virtual connections, that if they weren't there, maybe we would? And it got me to thinking about how to use the internet, how to use social media, because if there's people who are local enough to meet us and for us to meet them, and yet we haven't in the space of 3 years, 2 years in the past, 1 year in the future, then to what extent are we misusing the word friends? To what extent are we being sucked into this virtual vortex where we're spending huge portions of our life looking at phone screens, when in actual fact life is much fuller when it's lived in reality? And so in this episode then, I'm sharing my decision that what I'm planning to do is to actually remove the amount of Facebook friends that I've got. And in the act of removal, I can actually invite people to meet up. And those that, want to meet up, then it kind of makes sense for me to still regard them as friends. And I'm hoping that in that process of subtracting people from my virtual world, that I begin to add them into my real world. I did a Facebook post, it was either yesterday or 2 days ago, which basically made this point and told people that I was transferring from a virtual reality to actual reality, which I find much more satisfying. And just that very act in itself has meant 8 or 9 different real life connections of people that I haven't met in the last 2 years who were saying, tell you what, let's meet. And so that transfer, just from that intentionality of moving from the virtual to the real and making that known to people, has actually created an invite in and of itself to make connections for real. I've mentioned that we have this kind of, I refer to it in my post actually as a faux monstrosity, like this big false monstrosity where we think we're having connection because we're typing something out into the ether and people are clicking like. And we think that we're connected with them because they're broadcasting. But a broadcast is not a connection. It's a broadcast. There's nothing intimate about that. There's nothing kind of one-to-one. And even when you go out with maybe 2 or 3 friends, there's lots of one-to-one interactions happening in that group, within that group. Whereas on the internet, it is really just you press a button and it's a broadcast. And so it's less connecting than we think. It's hoodwinking us into thinking that we're getting connection. So I thought that I would go through 3 things very briefly that describe what I would refer to as a hierarchy of connection. So if you start with the virtual world, I would say that's no connection at all. I would say that that's kind of a deceit of connection. It's almost like you're reading a newspaper that people that you vaguely know are contributing to, but you're not actually connecting to them. You're just reading what they have to say. So what are the 3 elements of connection? Well, let's start. An email or a text message or a Facebook Messenger message or a WhatsApp or whatever technology you use is one step up from a Facebook post. A Facebook post, you're not really aiming at anybody. But when I text a friend and say, just wanted to catch up, how you doing? What's happening with the family? Or whatever I might say, I'm making a very deliberate, intentional connection with that particular person. And so that is an actual connection. It takes it above the swamp, this false swamp of Facebook or social media, to an intentional one-to-one, I'm connecting with you in a very deliberate way. One step up above that, of course, is if you actually have a phone call or a video call even, and then it's not just interacting with letters on a screen, but you're getting some sense of the person. And of course, the top level of contact, of connection rather, is where you're actually in person, where you're able to kind of be in the presence of the other person, where your nervous system and their nervous system are directly interacting, and where you're just being together and you're talking and you're having that richness of connection that comes from being in the same space as another human being. So you can see that there's 3 in this hierarchy of connection. At the bottom, although it is actually connection, it's better than a social media post, is where you will text or WhatsApp or send some sort of text-based message to somebody on an individual basis. Second is a call of some kind. And then the top level is where you're actually in the same space. And that's where the full richness, I think, of human connection occurs. And so when we're talking to each other or liking each other's posts or replying to each other on Facebook, we're actually denying ourselves, because everything's an opportunity cost, that kind of deception that we're connected with a person that we never ever see, even though they might live 10 minutes away. It hoodwinks us out of the richness of connection that we could get if we said, do you know what, I'm not actually happy just, having people on my Facebook list that I never see, who are only a few minutes away and I could see them very easily. Let's meet up, or let's ditch the facade, if you like, that we're connected here. Let's choose connection rather than just accept this kind of fake virtual reality, this facsimile, this substitute for what is actually real. And so that's kind of my insight today that I wanted to share. If you were to upgrade your Facebook or other social media connections to real life, what might that look like? What would feel okay to you? Could you actually reach out to people? Could you send somebody a text message? Could you swap phone numbers in the old-fashioned way? Could you give someone a call? Or could you maybe even say, the weather's nice at the moment. Do you fancy meeting up sometime and going for a walk together and having a chat and being in the same space as each other? I think social media is really useful in some ways, but it also comes at a potential cost if we use it in such a way that we allow ourselves to be hoodwinked that we're getting connection. How many people are sat in empty rooms at the moment, experiencing no other person and being completely dependent on Facebook? Now, of course, that can be useful too, if for whatever reason that's where you are at the moment. But what would it look like to be, it takes a bit of bravery even, to reach out and say, should we swap numbers and text? Or do you fancy a phone call? Or what would it be like to meet up? And I think as long as we're using that intentionally, and as long as we can understand that the connection that we're getting up on Facebook is kind of a copy of real connection, it can be useful. And I think, in actual fact, the best way to use social media, I think, is not to stay in that place of disconnection, but to use it as a portal for the next step. So someone might send me a friend request and I might spend, 6 to 12 months getting to know that person a little bit, getting to understand who that person is, getting the sense of whether I would like more with that person. But I think it's best when it's a portal, that rather than it being an opportunity cost for real connection, and think, oh yeah, I'm connected with Jim because I see their Facebook post after all, when actually I never ever experienced Jim in the reality of real life outside of the virtual world or the phone screen. And so I suppose that's my invite, that's my sharing. As I'm going on this little journey of bringing people into the real world, reclaiming the real world again, I wonder what it would look like if you could move up 1, 2, maybe even 3 levels up that hierarchy of connection, so that the people that you're experiencing are not just in the virtual world, but in your actual life as well. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next one. If you found this episode useful, please do share it so other people can get the benefits as well. If you'd like to work with me directly, I'm Alun Parry, and you can find more about me at liverpoolpsychotherapy.co.uk. And of course, you don't have to be local to me because I work online, so you can be based absolutely anywhere. And of course, please subscribe to the podcast as well, because it's absolutely free and it means that you'll never miss an episode again. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you again on the next one.